afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to theCUBE's live coverage of Qlik Connect 2026 here in Orlando. I'm your host, Rebecca Knight, sitting alongside my esteemed colleague, Rob Strechay. Rob, this is your jam, Qlik. You love this stuff,
I
and
do.
This next session is really...
Data and AI and how you can make it more usable is like really in my sweet spot.
Exactly.
So I love this.
Well, then who better to talk about this than the CTO of Qlik, Sam Pierson. I want to welcome Sam to the show. Thank you so much
for having me.
For coming on.
Yeah.
So let's start very big picture and have you riff a little bit on where you see AI architectures heading right now and what is forcing any changes that you see?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that we see as these things go into pilot mode or whether they're trying to move into production, like the biggest constraint that these organizations have is the data. And you think about all of the systems that they have in-house, whether it's a small company or a large enterprise. I mean, there's hundreds or thousands of systems, databases that have been around for a long time that maybe haven't been modernized. And it's like, okay, how do we get that data out of those systems into our AI reference architecture? And then when they're able to do that, there's still a bunch of issues with the data. So anyone that's done a data migration knows how much testing, how much fidelity is required. And so like those are some of the big problems that we see Qlik solving as people try to do this.
I mean, I think that's a critical way to put it because I think there's an architectural shift, right? I think they've been built as kind of, one-offs, a lot of one-offs and things like that, and you get no leverage at scale from that. What are you seeing with some of the technologies that are coming out like MCP and others that are helping people move from basically these, siloed experiments to being more larger scale platforms?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of a couple of things. One is the MCP side of things. The other is also just the way that people are changing the way that they work and the tools that they use. So for example, I think you go look at, I think everyone's familiar with like SaaSageddon and like what is the role of SaaS companies in general anymore. And you have all of those companies now that are either a system of record or a workflow where they are feeling pressure from this disruption. And each of those will have a strategic choice to make. Do you stay and fight and try to keep your users using your UI, using your data, keeping the data there, or do you find a way to expose that value into this new ecosystem? And I think the way that we landed on this last year, because we use AI across the board doing, not just our engineering work, but just day to day, whether it's management or what have you, right? We saw that there was a shift. And so, 2 years ago, you might be sitting there, waking up every day, looking at your email and looking at your calendar and doing some writing or hopping on Zoom. Now, people are going to start their day in an AI assistant like Anthropic, and they are going to get their information out of that. That's going to be reading their calendar, it's going to be summarizing things for them. And so I think there's both a combination of like the workforce patterns and the technology patterns that we're seeing a real shift in today.
So that is fascinating. I mean, just talking about how people's day-to-day lives are going to be changing as AI agents are more fully integrated into their workflows and into their morning routines, even just the example that you gave. So what is the upshot of that in terms of, if it's not me with my coffee looking at my calendar and it's an AI agent making decisions on my behalf and scheduling meetings or sending emails or doing some actual work that I need to get done.
Yeah.
How does that change everything?
Yeah, well, I just heard a really great one from one of our customers, and he was saying how in years past, it was so hard to keep up with like what was happening in technology, what was happening with products, and what they're seeing now is like AI is coming through and it's taking a lot of the drudgery and it's like cleaning your room or whatever it is, right? It's like, it's creating space for him now to like pay attention to what's happening in the market, pay attention to the product offerings that are coming out, figuring out how to onboard, right? And so I think the mix of work is really going to shift where frankly, there's a lot of work that is not really work, it's overhead. And a lot of that stuff, those are great candidates, I think, to just automate and have it be taken care of automatically. And now that's where the leverage comes in, and you can really focus on the things that create value, that move the organization forward. That's really what we see.
So let's kind of pull on that thread a little bit more, on a little bit of the geeky side of that, because
Sure.
when you start to look at things like MCP and MCP apps and things of that nature, how does that really tie into the business users, but also allow you to retain governance and control as an organization?
Yeah. Well, and again, I mean, we had a long series of conversations about this internally, right? Is like, what are the pros and cons of really integrating into this ecosystem? And today, Qlik is a powerful tool, right? The analytical capabilities, machine learning capabilities, data pipelines, all of those things are very powerful, but they can also be complex, right? And so you have a set of power users. Let's say there's 100 people in an organization that really know how to use this thing, and there is a supply problem for that organization. Now, if you are able to effectively take what those people are doing every day and empower 1,000 or 10,000 or 100,000 people now to be able to use that data and get insights out of it, that's where we see our upshot, is that we're actually able to expand our reach by plugging MCP into this other ecosystem. It actually becomes much more powerful. And I think the nuance here is like, you do have to have a very deliberate piece of value, right? Like you can't just plug everything in and like assume it's going to work, right? So we spent a lot of time really thinking about what is Qlik's differentiation, what do we do better than anyone else, and then figuring out how to package that up and then ship it into MCP. And so that's what we launched in February.
So when you're talking about scaling these powerful tools across an organization, moving from these 100 or so power users to tens of thousands of employees, what are the mindset shifts that are required in order for this to happen and for it to be as successful as organizations want it to be?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things, and you touched on the data governance piece of this as well, but it's like, the first conversation you have is, okay, how can you help me with AI? We check that box. Now the next conversation is with the security team, and they want to know, how are you securing the data so that we don't have a data leakage issue, we don't end up in the paper. And this is, again, like, you go back to the architectural choices, our AI is really inherits its security model from the core platform. So, if you and I are working on something, trying to get information from an app, I may have a different level of access than you. That will automatically come in, even if you're using Anthropic, because it will know, our systems know that you're the one that's calling it, and we can respect the rights of that, which gives the people who are provisioning those data sets and curating those data sets and managing them, it gives them a lot of leverage then to be able to provide access to that data to an organization at scale.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, one of the big thing around MCP is security. At the MCP Dev Days a couple weeks ago, we were talking about that. I almost asked ad nauseum because everybody had just come out RSA the week before.
Sure.
So, top of mind. When you look at this, I mean, I look at MCP for that reason, and I think even more importantly, you guys go beyond that, down into the semantic layer and the data product layer, and then down into even the Iceberg table layer, and understanding lineage and all of that. Does that give you an advantage when you're using MCP because you can have that full lineage governance?
Yeah, and this is a little bit about, it's more of what we recently released. We joined the Open Semantic Interchange. We have, and especially on the data side, sort of feeding into the overall platform, is you do have like a really strong story around the metadata, impact analysis, what were the upstream changes that may have affected something. And so, and again, like I said, I use this all the time, and I will ask a question. I'll be digging into like our cloud spend, for example. I'll say, what are the drivers of the cost? And part of that now is then, we have to be able to route those requests to the right data set, to the right apps. And so every piece of context now is like, this is not just a data mart. There is a rich semantic layer that sits on top of all of these things, all the way from the user and the organization and the company to everything horizontal in terms of the data products, data quality. There's some, again, it's like just this great stuff that seems to just happen where, I will ask a question and then it'll give me an answer, but it will caveat with, hey, this data came from this data set that had this data quality score, and so you can trust it, or hey, there might be some issues here. And that's all, and again, those are helpful context and clues to the user that I think historically have not been there right in line.
But it also underscores the need for having a human in the loop who is applying critical thinking to the answer that AI is giving.
Well, and I think there's that, but then even if you do end up building a closed loop system with an agent, having the monitoring and the observability over the entire thing, that's the thing that's going to give you the confidence to be able to put it into production and let it work.
As more companies are adopting these MCP style architectures, what are some mistakes that you're seeing or some misconceptions?
Yeah, I think, so one big one is, I think people are like, okay, things have settled down and I'm just we know the patterns and we're going to go build it. And I can tell you, if you build this from scratch today using the best practices, in 3 months, you're going to have to rip out a part of that. And again, this goes back to where we have really strategically leaned into all of the standards, right? So you talk about Iceberg, you talk about the Open Semantic Interchange, these things are we good?
Yep.
Oh, okay. All of these things being standards-based are going to help you kind of decouple and modularize your approach so that when you do inevitably need to make a change, you can do that safely and swap it out with the next best thing that just came out that makes your solution 10 times better.
So one of the things that I think you hit the nail on the head, and it's got to be tough for you as the CTO looking across this, trying to look into the future and make the platform as flexible as possible. But one of the things is this big kerfuffle of MCP being dead, skills is going to rule, no CLI.
Yeah.
Now don't just wrap your API. Where do you see this all landing? Because you're a consumer of this and also driving a lot of the vision there.
So I think for now, MCP is a great option. It's a great standard. Now there are going to be other things. Things like skill, as the context windows get bigger. Markdown, right? People have talked about well, I don't need MCP. I just need a file and a .md file to make this work. So I think those patterns are gonna fluctuate. But again, you just keep following sort of the standards and what they're good at. I think there's a couple other elements to it as well. Just the overall flexibility of these systems and having an iterative approach, being open to taking something out and replacing it with something new, that is it's the only way that you can really go forward. Because I think you back up a year, Anthropic was struggling and it was OpenAI is taking over the world, and now Anthropic is sort of the king of the hill, and OpenAI is oh, they're so far behind, and it's this, you can't. I think it's very difficult to based on everything we know today, what's going to happen, except it's going to be different, and you got to be prepared for it.
And you've got to maintain your steady approach in terms of how you're dealing with all of it too.
Well, and I think too, just having experiments, doing prototypes, doing experiments, learning, figuring out what works and what doesn't work, meeting with people. You talked about the meetups, things like that. I think those are all great ways to just stay in touch with what's going on.
The iterative approach, it never fails. Well, Sam, thank you so much for coming on theCUBE. A really interesting conversation.
Thanks for having me. Yeah.
I'm Rebecca Knight for Rob Strechay. Stay tuned for more of theCUBE's live coverage of Qlik Connect. You're watching theCUBE, the leader in enterprise tech news and analysis.